Piggy Chapter 9 has opened the door for a lot of things. Harder chapters for one, way better secrets. In my opinion, I think Chapter 9 possibly had some of the best secrets and kind of those ones that are really hidden that if you don't really pay attention to, you may not actually see. But that just means it's going to get better and better. I think IKEA and Minitoon are doing such a great job on the maps, whether it's the map making, the scripting, the skins, it's turning out to be fantastic and I'm actually loving the game a lot. So if I had to share my opinion secret-wise and also just map-wise, again, I do think Chapter 9 was possibly one of the best ones. But let me know what's your favorite chapter thus far down below in the comments. But it's time to talk about the next chapter, which will be Chapter 10, what it might possibly be, where it might possibly take place, and what do we think will possibly happen. Also, if you are enjoying the Piggy content on the channel, if you can, leave a like and share this video, and also feel free to subscribe for more. And if you want to support me further, you can use star code BIGB2 when getting yourself some Robux. It really shows your support for me as a creator and lets me know that you support me all the way. With that being said, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into our Chapter 10 predictions for Roblox Piggy. So before we get straight into Chapter 10, let's talk a little bit about Chapter 9 and just kind of have a conversation about what's been going on, what can we possibly expect. So again, you start out going to this safe place, which the safe place, and I say that with air quotation marks now, was not actually safe when you got there. You got there and you see that Ellie, the elephant, has been infected, and also the grandmother Piggy has also been infected. Now there's also a lot of cars in Chapter 9, so I definitely won't go into too much detail about who each car belongs to. At this point, I'm also thinking they're just added there. Some may also belong to some animals, but there are a lot of cars there. Also, if you did not know, Ellie phases through walls. Just kidding, but sometimes Ellie phases through walls. But again, this was such a good chapter, and the sequence of things that you had to do, I mean, you had to get dynamite, you had to get a fire extinguisher, so there's a lot of new things that's being added into Piggy, and again, it's only going to get better and better. And I'm assuming and I'm hoping that Chapter 10 will just be as good, and if not better. And I'm more interested also in the storyline too. So again, you go to the safe place with Pony and Zizzy, and long story short, again, their friends are infected. You make it to the end and you finally escape. And what happens when you escape? So once you escape, you're talking with, Pony and Zizzy. They're kind of telling you a little bit about their backstory, and also for the first time, they're really questioning you. They questioned you before, but not really, but this was like a proper conversation. So they're asking you, what did you do before all of this? Pretty much before everything's been going bad and everyone's been infected, and you confirm that you was a police officer looking for someone. Now in today's video, I want to talk about that someone, and we're talking about George. George is the center of all of this. Whether we like it or not, there's also a lot of things going on around this, which also kind of leads us to sometimes forget about poor George. And one thing that's really cool is that, not necessarily really cool, but kind of like a little secret, which again, I'll take to the comments later. Someone says poor George a lot, and I'll explain who that actually is in the Peppa Pig show, at least. Like, someone says poor George. If you already have an idea of who you think that is, that's going to also tie into where we are now and how this took place in the city. I'll give you a hint that it's someone in the city that says poor George. So anyway, you confirm that you were a police officer looking for someone. So if we rewind back to the house, that's who we're actually looking for. Again, there was no notes in the house, but we do know when it started that you do hear that sound, and then you know that George Pig is missing. And then you take also to the actual the station after, which is Chapter 2. And you also see those notes on the desk as well, saying, I can only hope that the officer that went to find out where the location of George Pig is okay. So someone is actually asking if you're okay, and I believe that note was written by Mr. P. So again, it could be either that was Mr. P or actually Doggy who has written this note. So that's something that's still a little bit up in the air. I can't wait till we get some really good clarification of who is actually writing these notes, especially the notes that aren't really, marked or named by someone. Notes that I feel like are by Mr. P are actually by Mr. P, at least. And I feel like notes that aren't could be pretty much anyone who's actually written these notes. For an example, in the Foxy cage, if we go back to Piggy Chapter 8, there's a note in the Foxy cage, and it says, why did my friends leave me here? And it was marked by no one, like signed by no one. So that's the assumption that that was written by Foxy just a few moments before getting infected because the infected can't talk anymore, which is possibly the reason why the note has fell and is just laying there for you to read. Or maybe it was perfectly placed and framed. Who knows? Again, we can start going on and on about that. So from the station, we also see a lot of notes too that really ties things to George. You can go back and start reading some of the key notes as well, and then I'll circle back around to where we are now about you talking about the police officer. But let's quickly go and read these notes here in the earlier chapters. So there was a note that said the majority of the family volunteered to help with testing. The test will begin shortly. Hopefully it goes well. And I think some of these notes also tie into the notes that we see in chapter 9. So if we're talking about the majority of the family is the Peppa Pig family. So we do know one thing is that the Peppa Pig family has volunteered for testing. Okay, and again, we know that something went wrong in this because we know that in later notes. Again, there were notes by Mr. P saying that the subjects are showing, signs of aggression and things like that. So yeah, that's something there. And there was also another note that said the search for survivors went bad. I'm now locked in this room with some crazy animals on the loose. So that wasn't really signed by Mr. P at all. And again, it's all up in the air to if these notes were actually written by, Mr. P. But part of me is also thinking, like, what if these notes are written by Doggy that actually aren't marked? Because Doggy, we also started hallucinating Doggy, and Doggy's been missing for weeks. So Doggy's also still up in the air, which again, I'll circle back around to the ending of chapter 9 too, where we see that shadowy figure. But the key to this is that George is still missing throughout all these notes and throughout all these chapters. And we shouldn't forget about George, especially if you have as well. So George was, again, missing. If we have any information, we're to contact, all those 6s as well. Now, the thing about this is that if George is actually missing, was George infected? Did George actually escape at all? Because there's two things to think about. George, got out of there before the testing, or George got tested or with the cure, quote unquote, the potions at least, got infected and then managed to slip out and slip away. And maybe this potion affects people different. I mean, take a look at Bunny. Bunny is sick and hasn't really turned just yet. You were also sick and you haven't turned just yet. So again, things like that also match. But remember that note that we saw, like the paper on the flyer that we saw of George in chapter 3, where it said George was missing, last seen with red eyes. So it does seem that George was infected at the time that happened, but again, George is still missing. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind. So now if we actually, and also let's think about patient 0 too. We still got some thoughts and theories on who patient 0 might actually be. But yeah, it said that also another note said the tests have shown promising results so far. The youngest was absent during these tests. Maybe also someone's framing George too on the walls. There's a lot of, what if George is being framed? Especially saying that his eyes were red. What if he was just never there, to be fair? So again, something to just, kind of really think about. Makes you think if, someone is being framed. I also feel like Mr. P is also being framed as well. And TSP is actually evil, possibly, and Mr. P isn't. I know Mr. P is actually funding this cure, but it does make me seem, makes you think, especially seeing the potato with the flower. We also think that, he has a reason for doing this. He believes this cure works, and maybe there's someone bigger in the picture that's framing everyone, but I know that person is not George. So if we circle back to chapter 9, you talk about yourself saying, you were a police officer. What did you guys do? And you're talking to Zizzy and Pony. So Pony gets into talking about, what his father, what he was trying to become, an optometrist like his father. And then Zizzy, was a fencing coach and, even taught his, her little sisters. So things like that. And during this scene, we see a shadowy figure in the background. And you also hear a noise and you kind of go back there. So who could this shadowy figure actually be? My theories and thoughts on this is the shadow figure could be George. Why? Because I feel like it could circle back around to be George. Now, I don't want to go based off of the shape of the figure. However, if you think about the secret that we had in chapter 9, where we saw the shadow outline of the potato in the window, why would that shadow, if it was Mr. P or someone else, don't you think it will also be a shadow figure as well, like the shape and size of a potato? I think that will also throw up a lot of questions. Let's say if it was someone different, but who exactly knows? I do think either this is going to be one person that is cured, maybe, so it could be George pig that's cured behind this dumpster, and then which also maybe leads you into a sewer map, which is why they're behind a dumpster. I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about the map just yet, but sewers would be pretty cool. I think a lot of people wanted that, especially you follow them through the city down into the sewers. That would kind of make sense. I think so as well. I mean, a sewer would be under the city, and also think about the hospital. The metro was under the hospital. So let me know what you guys think on the sewer idea. So, you know, you kind of go after them with Zizzy and yourself. Well, you go after, you know, the shadowy figure with Zizzy. Zizzy's coming to check you out, and that's pretty good because now you have somewhat of backup. Now it could be that something happens to Zizzy or something happens to Pony while that's gone, but we'll get into more details about that later. But yeah, the shadow figure could be my top suggestions for this. I will also add a poll in the video that should pop up now in the top right corner. Who do you think the shadow figure is? George, possibly, Bunny, or get a hold of this, Doggy. So I'm just gonna use those three for now. Again, this could change. This is just my thoughts, predictions, and theories on it. So do you think the shadow figure is George Pig? Do you think it's actually Doggy, or do you think it's Bunny? Again, let me know what you think between all the chapters, and again, all the information we've shared as well. Who do you think this shadow figure actually is? Again, it would be really cool to see if this is George. George kind of gets on the team, and then you can kind of get some information out of George. Again, a lot of things can happen in this time, so we will just have to see. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to go to some of the comments and read off some of your thoughts and theories on George Pig. And again, I don't think Mr. P, or maybe Mr. P actually has George kidnapped. Still testing. Who actually knows? So yeah, let's go ahead and take to the comments and see what you all think. Ida says, or George is on the dumpster. That scary things that captured George. So I'm assuming that, now I don't think George is inside of the dumpster, but maybe they're saying that that is George behind the dumpster. I'm also on that. Talking Skittle says, I think the shadow in the garbage is George. I think he is not infected. So I'm thinking that's definitely going to be a cured character behind there. And that's going to also save Mr. P and kind of realize like, okay, someone is actually cured and this is working, but you do have that phase of aggression. We also have a comment by AVTP, and they say, my theory is I think the guy who is watching you is George Pig, or I think it is Giraffe. But I think something happened to Pony. So I also think something will happen to Pony. Again, I'll elaborate on that a little bit later. But yeah, I think something will definitely happen to Pony, and I think that could be George Pig. Farah says, Grandma wrote the note about George Pig since the note was in her mini shop. So again, we can also talk about the notes that we saw in the actual chapter 9 as well. I mean, that was a big revealing note too. Like, thinking about that, like, so if that note was actually written by the grandma as well, which will start that. So let's quickly go over those notes again. So we saw a note that said we need to start recruiting soon. I'll start with my closest friends. That was by TSP. TSP is just evil. Also, again, the news of the cure has been going around, funded by Mr. P. Let's hope all goes well. And again, it was funded by Mr. P. It doesn't say that Mr. P created it. And also the note that is in the Grandma Pig shop says that poor George. And again, that's what I wanted to say. So that person that says poor George is actually the grandma. And the grandma says that in the TV show. So that makes sense here to who is actually saying this, and that is possibly the grandma. So poor George, he disappeared when my family acted up. I hope he's safe. So again, this could have been written by the grandma. Again, a lot of people are thinking this is written by the grandma because it was actually found in her shop. This next one's by Couch Potato, and they say, my theory is that when we are in chapter 1, when we hear that sound, again, we hear that sound in chapter 1, I think it was George being hit by Piggy. And then she notices you and hits you in chapter 9. When the note says that George Pig is the one, I think the one who wrote that is the grandmother Piggy, because she is the family of George, and the note was written on her shop, of which is the Grandma Piggy's poutine. So yeah, that's something there that I really think too. Again, I think that note was possibly written by the Grandma Piggy. Pixelated says the note that was saying sorry about George would have been written by Grandma Piggy, as it was in her shop and her family did go crazy, which was infected. And I completely agree with that. Sarah Davison says the one that says poor George is from the grandmother, because in Peppa Pig episodes, the grandmother says poor George. Now that would actually explain a lot of things as well. And we also have another theory by Lenny Carlos, and they say, from what I heard, George is Memory, Skelly, and Piggy, and Angel. What if George is actually going through all these phases of being these piggies and transforming, and then, or maybe this was actually Patient Zero. Let's just think, what if George was Patient Zero, right? Captured by Mr. P, Patient Zero, turns into all these piggies version, and then now is cured, and at the end is looking at you behind the dumpster and is going to reveal something. So who knows exactly, but really good job on the theories, guys. With that being said, that's gonna wrap it up for today's video. Let me know what you guys thought of this. Again, I do think this is going to be George. Again, it could also be Bunny or Doggy, but I do think it will be someone that is cured, so we can get a sign of how, you know, this potion is actually working. We've seen all the infected characters throughout all of this, but not so much of a cured character just yet. But I hope you all enjoyed. I would love to hear your thoughts and predictions down below in the comments. I will also be sharing them in the future video. Also in the next video, I'm going to cover something really important, so you want to make sure you do not miss it. It's going to reveal a lot for the future stories. But thank you all so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, feel free to leave a like and share it. Also feel free to subscribe for more, and if you're new to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.